They called them assassins, fanatics, killers in the dark. To their enemies, they were shadows that moved with the quiet of a knife sliding between ribs, whispers that ended in silence. But what if that was never the point? What if the true weapon hidden inside the mountain fortress of Alamut wasn't a dagger at all, but a scroll? Not a cult born of violence, but a school built on ideas. Not a death order, but a library, one crafted to vanish before it could ever be fully understood. The legends say the assassins struck fear with steel. Yet perhaps what they carried most carefully were pages. Pages where silence wasn't weakness but strategy, where knowledge mattered more than blood, and where secrecy was a shield against annihilation. Long after the fires consumed the fortress, the memory of what was once preserved still lingers, half dream, half riddle, refusing to die. So let's begin slowly. You've heard the stories sharpened into legend. Tonight, we drift through the dust, between the folds of chronicles written in fear, and behind gates that no longer stand but once held something caliphs feared more than armies. High in the mountains of northern Persia, far beyond the reach of imperial roads, there rose a citadel carved into the skin of stone itself. They called it Alamut, the eagle's nest. To many, Alamut was a place of terror. The stronghold of the Nizari Ismailis, outsiders labeled Hashin, the root of the word assassin. From this mountaintop, the legends claim, trained killers descended to strike down kings, viziers, and crusader lords, chosen targets erased without mercy. But that is only the version the world chose to remember. Alamut was not just a fortress. It was a school, a library, and a sanctuary of thought. Chroniclers whispered that its shelves contained manuscripts from ancient Greece, India, and Persia, stored alongside esoteric interpretations of the Quran, Gnostic parables, and forbidden works on memory, perception, and time. It was less a den of killers than a monastery of seekers. The men who lived within those walls were not merely soldiers. They were initiates, trained in a tradition older and more complex than the sword. They believed in a living imam hidden from the world, a guide whose presence infused their mission. They believed that knowledge was power, that secrecy was survival, and that silence itself could be resistance. When enemies drew near, they did not march out with banners. They disappeared. And when they returned, they did not bring armies. They delivered messages, precise, unforgettable, and often deadly. Their reputation was crafted not through numbers, but through the chilling certainty that they could strike at will. To the outside world, the assassins were painted in black and white, fanatics high on hashish, cloaked killers with knives tucked into robes. But if you listen carefully, another story emerges. A slower, stranger, more careful one, written not in blood, but in code. Over the next journey into this forgotten history, we move through fragments, suppressed documents, ruined scrolls, and whispered accounts. Together, we search for the traces of those who believe that true power does not shout, it endures in silence. Imagine now that you stand at the base of a mountain in northern Persia. The morning mist clings to the jagged cliffs, rising like teeth into a pale sky. Somewhere high above, nearly invisible against the stone, is a fortress no army ever truly conquered. Alamut, the eagle's nest, looming, hidden, waiting. Not just a fortress, but a symbol. To some, it represented resistance. To others, heresy. And to those who feared it most, it was the embodiment of silence itself, too careful to crush, too strange to define. Local shepherds whispered that the path to its summit was cursed, that horses balked at its slopes, and that even birds veered away from its shadow. Approaching armies often reported nothing unusual, only a shifting shadow on the cliffside, until it was too late. Their generals fell one by one, sometimes by steel, sometimes by fear. The Seljuks, the Mongols, even later Persian dynasties, all attempted to break Alamut. They starved it, surrounded it, bribed it, threatened it. But Alamut endured. In 1256, the Mongol general Hulagu Khan brought overwhelming force to its gates. His men dragged siege engines across mountains, carried firebombs, and bore the ruthless certainty of an empire that had never lost a campaign. And yet, when Alamut finally fell, it was not because it had been conquered. It was because its keepers chose to leave. Before abandoning their sanctuary, the assassins burned their own library. Accounts speak of scrolls stacked in a column taller than a man, set alight under Mongol eyes. Others claim the texts were sealed in stone cisterns, dissolving into ink and water. Why would those who had guarded knowledge with such care destroy it in their final hour? Some believe it was to prevent their secrets from falling into the hands of enemies. Others see it as an act of purification, erasing what could not be preserved. And then there is a third, more tantalizing theory, that what burned was only a decoy. The true archive, the heart of Alamut's memory, had already been moved. This was not cowardice. It was strategy. Throughout assassin history, we see a recurring pattern: when fire comes, the valuable things are already gone. When destruction threatens, they dissolve into shadow. And when silence returns, they reappear, changed, but still intact. Archaeological excavations of Alamut's ruins reveal an intricate network of rooms, staircases, and aqueducts cut into the mountain. Water channels ran with precision. Walls were treated to mute sound. Hallways curved to distort memory, while narrow slits of light disoriented intruders. The architecture itself seems intentional, as though the very stone was part of the message. In this, the assassins diverge from their myth. They were not reckless killers but mathematicians, astronomers, and philosophers. The fortress functioned more like a monastery than a barracks. Recruits studied theology, logic, astronomy, and language. They were trained to observe, calculate, and remember. Violence, when it came, was ritualized, rare, and highly selective. Still, their reputation endured. To their enemies, they remained heretics. To allies, they were a sanctuary of truth. And to those who entered and lived to tell the tale, Alamut was a place where resistance itself was redefined, not through armies, but through precision and silence. The most curious reports came not from soldiers, but from envoys. Diplomats described time itself seeming to shift inside the fortress. Conversations that lasted hours passed under suns that barely moved. Questions were answered with parables or not at all. One envoy wrote, "I left with fewer answers than I had questions, but I carried away something heavier than knowledge. A weight I cannot name." What was that weight? He never explained. But perhaps we can glimpse it in a fragment of inscription found near the ruins. The words, broken and incomplete, read, "That which climbs does not escape. That which disappears endures." Strange words for a military base, unless the fortress was never about war in the first place. For Alamut was not just defended by stone. Its guardians became part of the mountain itself. By vanishing, they endured. By disappearing, they persisted. In doing so, they created something too strange to conquer, too careful to collapse. Climb higher still in your imagination. The air thins, the rocks burn under the sun, and silence hangs heavy. And then, unexpectedly, you see green. A terrace of gardens. Pomegranate trees, cypress shadows, and still pools reflecting the sky. Alamut, it is said, held not only libraries but gardens of wonder. Marco Polo claimed these gardens were a paradise where drugged youths were led to believe they had glimpsed heaven. Promised return only if they obeyed their master's commands, they became loyal killers. It is dramatic, cinematic, and almost certainly false. Yet the gardens were real. Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, the polymath who lived at Alamut, described orchards, terraces of grain, and medicinal herbs, irrigated by aqueducts carved into the mountain. In a barren land, they grew abundance from rock. Engineering, yes, but perhaps also something more. Local folklore suggests the gardens were planted according to constellations, herbs sown when stars aligned. Superstition? Perhaps. Yet modern pollen studies confirm that non-native species once thrived there, plants impossible to cultivate at such altitude. Among them was Ferula perisca, known for its resin and its rarity. Why such effort? Maybe the gardens were not just food. Maybe they were memory. Across cultures, sacred gardens are places of initiation, designed as microcosms of the cosmos. Walled, geometric, patterned, paradise not as indulgence but as map. Within such a space, initiates could be trained not through words but through perception. To feel time in petals, to read the wind like scripture, to see patterns in shadow. Marco Polo mistook this for deception. Perhaps he glimpsed initiation, a training ground for perception itself. The gardens were not Eden. They were an archive of sensation. Knowledge not written down but woven into scent, shadow, and fruit. A living code. And when the Mongols came, the assassins salted the pools and burned the terraces, not from spite, but to protect what could not be carried away. You can burn a book. But how do you destroy a memory tied to fragrance, to the angle of sunlight, to the bloom of a flower? You don't. You let it dissolve into soil, waiting to be rediscovered by those who know how to see. Yet the stories of assassins endure not only in gardens and scrolls but in figures. Again and again, chronicles describe the same young man, calm, loyal, stepping into death without hesitation. Sometimes he kills a prince. Sometimes a preacher. Sometimes no one at all. Always the same age, the same silence, the same vanishing act. Who was he? Perhaps he never existed. Perhaps he was propaganda, a symbol created by enemies, or by the assassins themselves. A mask, a ritual identity passed from one initiate to another. Or perhaps something stranger still, a role, not a person. Fragments from a Nazari outpost near Rudbar speak not of martyrs, but of dissolving, of the chosen face who carries the shadow so others may pass. Not death, but transformation. Not suicide, but shifting between realities. One Crusader bishop described capturing an assassin. After days of interrogation, the prisoner simply vanished from a locked cell, leaving behind only a carved symbol, a circle intersected by 3 lines. Later, the same symbol surfaced in Jesuit commentaries about those who wear forms too volatile for truth. Perhaps the assassin's greatest weapon was not killing, but becoming. Not soldiers, but symbols. Not men, but masks worn across centuries. No assassin's face was ever reliably recorded. This absence was deliberate. Anonymity was the point. A line from a 12th century Ismaili text reads, "I die in every century. I walk in every crowd. I wait behind the unseen door." No name follows, only that same symbol. Perhaps the young man never died. Perhaps he never lived, except as an idea that still walks. In a Venetian archive lies a Persian manuscript, catalogued as agricultural notes. Soil types, star charts, irrigation. But in its margins, faint ink reveals diagrams of constellations, organs, and cryptic symbols, including the assassin's circle. What appears mundane may in fact be encrypted philosophy. Some scholars call this philosophical steganography, hiding dangerous truths inside harmless categories. Heresy disguised as farming manuals. Doctrine smuggled as ledgers. A secret archive scattered across the ordinary. And so the narrative begins to shift. For centuries, the assassins were remembered for blades. But perhaps their truest weapon was intellectual. They rejected absolute authority. They challenged the monopoly of kings and caliphs. They believed truth resided in hidden layers, not in decrees from above. That alone was enough to terrify the powerful. For an idea is harder to kill than a man. And so their scrolls were burned, their gardens salted, their names reduced to myths of killers high on hashish. But fragments remain. A phrase repeated in the Venetian manuscript says it best: to strike true, the blade must not cut. Meaningless as tactics. Profound as philosophy. The dagger was never the point. The true weapon was the doctrine. And perhaps, somewhere in silence, it still endures.